our session today during this Trustees Week, all about insurance and how to mitigate risks for your community groups and social enterprises. So that is pretty much all from me at this stage, and I'm going to hand over to Luke, who will tell us a lot more about insurance that I possibly could. Over to you, Luke.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so great to be here, everyone. I'll share screen in a second. Usually I would go around, do a bit of a round robin and just say, what's your name, where you're from, and that kind of thing. But as there's quite a few of us, which I'm surprised about and pleased about on a Wednesday afternoon, could you just pop in the chat your name, your organisation, and then just for me personally as well, just the size of your organisation. So either your income level or your number of employees or volunteers, just so I can get a better understanding of the size of the organisations that are here today. That will help me keep my examples relatable. And should keep you all interested. That would be fantastic if you could use the chat part of the function to do that, please. So thank you for inviting us along. The main thing for us today is just to get over the message that this is a completely free of charge, educational based webinar. So we don't want to be trying to sell you something. This is hopefully just going to give you all the information you need to be able to start your insurance journey and to start having that conversation with either with ourselves or with another insurance broker or just internally, so you can start understanding the type of insurance you need and what policies you should consider, and also get you thinking about risk management and also you know how that would look in the future. So for us, a little bit about us before we get into the detail. We're based over in Leicester, so just off junction 21 of the M1, so not a million miles away from you guys. We are a general insurance broker, business insurance broker with thousands of clients, tens of thousands of clients across the country. Everything ranging from freelancers and self-employed individuals up to large corporate businesses with millions of pounds of turnover. In the division that I function in, we specialise in charity insurance. For the purpose of the conversation today, when I say charities, I just mean not-for-profits in general. So you can be registered or unregistered, whatever you fall in that bracket of. We just mean if you are not running for a not-for-profit organisation, we would class you as a charity. We have over 2,500 individual charity and not-for-profit customers currently with ourselves. We have an online quote and buy system that allows not-for-profits to who are much smaller to buy insurance online without speaking to anyone. That helps reduce the overall premium. So I think the cheapest policy is £60 there, which is quite unique. We have a dedicated website that will give you more information on useful blogs, articles, general resources that we come across, and also some funding opportunities. As we are a specialist in the insurance sector, insurance companies offer various different funding campaigns that we're made aware of, that we share. And for the purpose of this as well, we can have a dedicated and specialist phone call with yourself as a free consultation afterwards. So if you would like to take this conversation further after today's training session, and we can be more than happy to answer a few questions today, that would be great. But if you want to take it offline and start exploring your opportunities and see if there is an option to buy an insurance policy, we'd be more than happy to have that conversation with you. So as you can imagine, depending on the size and scale of your organisation, the insurance requirements will be different. We'll base it on the fact that it's a little bit smaller. So we're talking kind of maybe a couple of employees, maybe an office. But even if you're not that size and you're smaller than that, this information is purely an intro to the conversation of insurance. If you require slightly more higher level information, we can either provide a separate training session that goes into more detail, or we can take those conversations offline. But if you don't have insurance in place, as a very minimum, the three things on the screen are the things that you should consider. So public liability, employer's liability, and buildings and contents insurance. As a very minimum, these are the things that you should have in place. And we'll go through what each one of those are. I'm just going to check the chat as well, just to see what size we're looking at. So fantastic, Emma. So you're definitely a slightly larger one for us, which is great. 350 members, committee size 10, fantastic. Yes, there's some great size organisations here, so it's good to know that what kind of area we're looking at here. So yes. So I'll use some examples of some slightly bigger organisations, and then please do ask questions if you wish to kind of go into a bit more detail to make sure that I'm covering everything off. So when it becomes, when you start looking at insurance, the first thing you should consider are these 3 steps. Now, if you have an insurance policy in place, you still should consider these 3 steps. Maybe you're an individual who's now responsible for the insurance policy for your organisation, and you didn't set up the original policy, or maybe you did set up the original policy, but it was quite some time ago. Therefore, you may need to revisit this every few years or more often. So the first thing we would always suggest you should do is look at what you do as an organisation. Look at your charity description. Now, when I say charity description, I don't mean something that you'd put on the charity, like on your website, which is quite marketing and almost a little bit fluffy. We want it to be very descriptive, but so the insurer can look at it and they say, yes, I understand what their day-to-day is, because the first step is understanding what exposure you have. So that could be, are you giving advice over the phone or counselling services face-to-face? That's one kind of risk versus a charity that is a repair charity that's repairing white goods to be sold secondhand to raise money for a local cause or to help support those in poverty that may not have those items. There are 2 fundamentally different activities on a day-to-day basis that you would be undertaking. Therefore, being able to describe what you do on a day-to-day basis is very, very important to have that in your mind. The second step would be to look at what you own. So this is what we would call the assets part. So do you own anything that would cost you money to replace? So you can own something which you didn't pay for because it was gifted to you. But the question is, if it was to be damaged, stolen, or missing, or completely destroyed, would you, as an organisation, have to pay money to replace that item? Now, hopefully you may be able to get some things for free via donations, but general rule of thumb is that if you have to pay for it, you should look to considering insuring it. Now, that could be equipment, so things that help you do your activities, or it could be things like laptops or furniture and fixtures and fittings that you may have an office that you operate from. It could be a property or a building. So they're all things that you should be looking to insure. Once you understand what you need to insure, and also you need to look at your exposure as step 3. So look at who you work with. So who could you cause damage to, or what could you cause damage to? Who could you cause injury to? And who could be injured or hurt or be impacted by your activities and then try to potentially sue you as an organisation because they are financially out of pocket or injured because of an activity that you've undertaken. Now, none of us are here today to say that, that we will hurt someone or something will happen, but the reason for insurance is that these things do unfortunately happen. We would never intentionally hurt someone, but accidents do happen. So we need to look at who you work with and who you impact. So that could be volunteers, it could be your beneficiaries and service users, it could be employees, it could be other businesses that you're working with, it could be another property that you've gone into or that you've rented, for example, for meeting purposes as a conference room. All of those things is you as an individual or as a charity or as an employee could impact and therefore affect those people, businesses, property. So we need to look at your liabilities, and step 3 is all about your liability exposure, which I'll explain where that would be covered in a second. So the first of the 3 insurance policies we'll go through today is public liability insurance. Now, as a general rule of thumb, public liability is cover against any accidental injury to a third party. So that could be a person of the public or damage to their property. So that could be someone's car. Now, a good example is, a classic example of that public liability insurance is if you have a building that you operate from and that you're responsible for, you have a visitor that comes up, parks in the car park, a tile falls off the roof and lands on that person's car. They're going to be unhappy because they don't want to pay for repair because that's your fault, because it's the building caused that damage and you're responsible for it. So the public liability would step in and cover that. Again, public liability would also cover injury to another person. So say, for example, if you have someone to your office and they trip over a loose tile on the floor, or a rug that's not been secured properly, or a wire that's trailing across, they fall over, break an arm or something more serious, they could be out of pocket because of that, i.e. they may not be able to work, or they may need physiotherapy, or they may need private kind of medical expenses incurred. Then rightly so, that person wouldn't want to pay for that themselves, and they shouldn't. Therefore, they would look for compensation. You wouldn't want to pay that as an organisation out of the charitable money, because that's not what the charitable funds are there for. Therefore, you push that onto your public liability policy and they would cover the cost. Now, with this insurance policy, they also cover the legal response and the legal expenses part of it as well. So if you cause injury to someone, you may not even realise that you've done it. You may not have done it, but you receive a letter from an ambulance chasing solicitor that's representing a random third party that is claiming that you've caused, when I say you, I mean you as a charity, not you as an individual person, has caused damage to or injury to this person. If you don't want to be receiving replying to a solicitor's letter because they're a solicitor, they'll try and trip you up. You want to have a legal team acting on your behalf. Now that is expensive, and also again you'd have to use your charitable funds to fund that. Where if you have a public liability insurance policy, you pass that accusation or that letter or that claim onto your insurance company, and then their solicitors react and respond and work with yourself to come back with a response and find out what actually happened. So they are very important covers. As a minimum, you should have this as a standard. Because no matter what you do, you will be interacting with the public in one way or another, or you could potentially cause injury. This is a standard cover to have in place. Now, employers' liability, I understand that many people may be sitting here today to say, well, we don't have employees, we only have volunteers. Well, in the insurance industry, we love to name things, make things more complicated and name things incorrectly. But under a charity policy, and this isn't a given across the whole industry, but we can say it is on our policy because we're a charity specialist. Under employers' liability, we will also cover volunteers, because a volunteer operating or working for you has the same you have the same legal responsibilities of their care and their health and safety responsibilities of them as if they were an employee. So that it's not as stringent, but there is still a care that you need to give to those volunteers, and you can't be putting them in harm's way. So you will need to tell them what to do. You will be giving them direction. They will be acting on behalf of the charity. So therefore, if they're injured whilst working for the charity or volunteering for the charity, then rightly so, if they're out of pocket, or incur additional expenses because of their injury whilst working for yourself or volunteering for yourself, they would attempt to try and claim that money from the organisation. Now, the employer's liability also again does cover the legal element, so the legal response side of it, having solicitors that would respond and react to a claim against you, which is vitally important because we all know how expensive solicitors can be. And then also, if there was an accident and there was an injury and that person is rightly so due to be compensated, the insurance policy would also cover the compensation element as well. Same with the public liability. Public liability would also cover the compensation if you were to be found at fault as an organisation. So if accidents do happen, we completely understand that. So employers' liability is a legal responsibility in the UK if you have employees. If you just have volunteers, it is not a legal requirement. However, my professional opinion is that you should definitely have employers' liability if you have only volunteers. It's still very applicable and strongly recommended. When you speak to another insurance broker or an insurance company, even if, especially if they're not a charity specialist, but even if they are, please do ask the question, under employer's liability, will my volunteers be covered? And at least you know personally that you've asked that question, and the person on the other end of the phone or face-to-face should be able to explain yes or no, they aren't covered, but usually they should be covered, the volunteers should be covered under this. So examples of this is, say for example, if you are doing guided walks and you have a volunteer doing being a marshal through the woods with your beneficiaries, and that person trips over, breaks a wrist again or a hip, then they could face be out of pocket because of different expenses, medical expenses, same kind of thing as public liability, but they're the volunteer. They would try and claim against you as the person that are responsible for them. If, for example, you failed to do the correct risk assessment and didn't guide them properly or didn't give them the correct advice or the correct training, you would be deemed as potentially responsible for that injury. So then this is where this employer's liability would cover the volunteer, cover you for the expenses that that volunteer is trying to claim against the charity. So hopefully that provides a brief overview of what employer's liability is and what that would look like. So just in summary, a brief overview of the types of insurance that you should be looking to consider. As a very basic, core insurance covers that you should have as an organisation: public liability, employer's liability, and then if you own assets or are responsible for any type of assets, that could be something as simple as laptops and mobile phones, it could be a building or an office, or it could be all the fixtures and fittings and the desks and chairs and furnitures within a property that you rent. You should look to obtain buildings or contents insurance or all risks insurance for the laptops and the things that are away out in the general public across the UK. Things to consider as a next step once you have those insurance policies in place. This is almost level 2 beyond the introduction to insurance, but still worth mentioning now just so people are getting into that mindset. The first thing I would always recommend for any not-for-profit, especially if you're a registered charity, especially if you're of some of the sizes that some of the attendees today have put in there, so you know you have a number of employees and whatnot, is trustees indemnity insurance. Now that covers you for the kind of errors or mistakes that a trustee could make whilst working for the charity. Now, again, trustees on our policy, this isn't the same across the board, but it is on our policy. Even though it's called trustees indemnity insurance, it also covers the senior management team. So that could be the chief exec, it could be the head of finance, or it could be the head of HR director, or the financial the financial team. It would all be covered within that. So it's not just for trustees, so it is wider. And then also there is an element of protection for the entity. And what that means is if a claim comes in against an accusation or an investigation from the Charity Commission, or say the Care Quality Commissioner comes in and investigates, there's going to be costs incurred to the organisation. Therefore, they would put a claim in against the entity of the organisation, potentially, and also the individuals as trustees. Now, as a charity, the funds aren't there to respond or to protect and pay solicitors for an accusation that's against an individual trustee for incorrectly running the charity or abusing position of power. So therefore, you wouldn't want to pay for the funds, pay for that protection, pay for that legal response yourself, because what happens if the trustee did actually do something wrong? So therefore, a trustee's indemnity policy would cover the legal expenses incurred and potentially any payouts other than fines. Fines aren't covered, but the legal response, the legal representation, and also potentially payouts for whatever payout may happen under the trustee's indemnity policy. So it's very useful to have. Many charities say, but is that a benefit in kind to the trustees as such? In our eyes, no, it is not, because, and it hasn't been for some time, there was a legislation a few years ago that was brought in, but in essence, because this policy doesn't just cover trustees, it covers a number of the employees and also covers the entity of the organisation. This isn't just for the trustees, this is for the entity of the charity, the employees within it, and the trustees. So worth thinking about. That is a little bit more of a secondary step, and it can get quite technical. We do offer a separate training session to explain trustees indemnity, or have information that we can share around, but probably worth a conversation offline if anyone's interested to find out a bit more. And then the second one I would always suggest that you should look to consider is professional indemnity. So if you are providing counselling, or if you are providing any professional services or advice, this covers you for kind of any oops or errors, mistakes as such that you may give, or an employee or a volunteer may give in their professional capacity. So we work with a number of debt charities. They are giving out financial advice, helping people get out of debt, applying for different loans or credit cards, or trying to consolidate debts, and suggesting how they would do that. If a beneficiary did that and then actually was in a worse off position because they followed that person's advice, they could sue the charity for giving poor advice or bad advice that has led them to be financially out of pocket further. So professional indemnity covers that, the financial impact of your mistake on the beneficiary of the organisation. So again, that's a secondary level cover. It's only applicable for those that are giving advice and providing that kind of service. So not all charities will require it, but something worth considering in the future as well. And then lastly, some just things to consider. Cyber insurance is extremely topical, and we are seeing an increased level of cyber attacks in the not-for-profit sector. That is because these hackers believe that even the largest charities in the UK underspend and undersecure their systems when it comes to cyber and the infrastructure that they run on. Therefore, they believe that it would be easier to hack a charity or a not-for-profit. So therefore, we would consider a separate cyber insurance policy. Again, if that's of interest and you'd like to know more, let us know. We can look at doing a separate training session, but there's a whole load of further information for that. And then lastly, event insurance. So if you are running an event to raise money for your cause, and you wish to protect that if the event were to be cancelled. So say, for example, as an example, we have a number of charity customers that run the same local event that happens every year. They make, say, £5,000 profit, and that goes directly back into the charity to help sustain the charity. If that event were to be cancelled because of, say, for example, national mourning or bad weather, say if it was an outdoor event and it got snowed off, or well, not snowed off, you wouldn't be outside, but say if it got rained off because there was a storm that came into the country, or say, for example, if there was an incident in London, a terrorist attack in London, your event is in Manchester, for example, or Birmingham, but they say all public events are closed down, we're not doing any because we don't know what the threat to the country is at the minute. You could look to protect the revenue that you would make from the event, or the money that you've spent on organising the event, so you can cover both. But again, two separate covers. If you wish to have a conversation with us in the future, or would like to know more, we can do a separate session on those two insurance policies there. So the ways that we can help, we offer free risk assessment templates. So they're all on our purpose-built website. So you can go onto the bhwcharities.co.uk website. We have access to funding opportunities. So if you'd like to be kept up to date, follow us on Twitter, and then we will share information as and when we hear of funding opportunities. We have access to useful insight guides and resources via the website. So follow us on social media for that as well, and revisit the website every few weeks. We put all of our free information on there, which has been highly regarded over the last year during the pandemic. And then lastly, a completely free of charge insurance review. So if you think that you have an insurance policy in place, but following today's conversation, you think there may be gaps, or you think that there could be an issue, or you'd like just to have a bit of a health check, someone else set it up, or it was set up many years ago, we would be more than happy to completely free of charge check your current policy, highlight any key areas that that may be worth consideration going forward, or any potential gaps in cover because you don't have a certain insurance policy in place. We give you that information. We would always suggest you go back to your current insurance broker or insurance company to make those amendments, and then at renewal, if you wish to come back and get an alternative quote, we'd be more than happy to do so as well. So that is a real brief overview of the introduction to insurance and how it works. I hope that was useful. Just checking the time, so we've got plenty of time for questions. If people would like to jump in and ask any questions, or Aline, if you're able to pick some out of the chat.
Yes, thank you very much, Luke. I've seen this presentation before, but I do find it, I've learned something else again today. So thank you very much for sharing all of this with us. I am wondering what Michael's cat is called. That's probably one for the chat. Let's see. So Claudine had some questions about, you had a question, Claudine, about your management committee and whether they would be covered, running events and covered, what does it say? Our management committee are constantly running events to fundraise for the hall. I do not think they take out insurance. Would they be covered in any way by public liability?
Yeah, so good question. Yes, so the public liability, so injury caused to a member of the public, that would usually be picked up within your public liability insurance. However, with ours, because we understand the charity sector, we say up to 1,000 people in attendance, and an event can't last for more than 1 day, and you can't have like fairground rides and so on and so forth there. So that's under our policy, but that may not be the case for all insurance policies. So I would always ask the question and get that confirmation from your current policy.
Does that answer the question, Claudine?
It does, yes. It means absolutely that I need to review the insurance. To be fair, you know, it's a village hall. No, we don't have up to 1,000 people within a hall. But as a trustee, I don't think that question has ever been asked. So it's really good. And we will certainly be contacting you for a review. Thank you.
Perfect. Yeah. And again, most of these questions, and please don't take this as a scaremongering exercise. I'm very conscious that it's hard not to do that in the insurance sector. It is always doom and gloom. We are aware of that. However, I'm fairly confident if you are on a good insurance policy, not even a great insurance policy, you ask that question, they say, yes, of course you're covered. But the most important thing is having that email chain to show that you've asked the question and then you've got the response. Because if you're unaware, you kind of have to assume that it's not until you've got that information. But yeah, I'd imagine if it's a community centre or a village hall, that policy would wrap up those events as well.
Thank you, Luke. And we've got another question from Lee. I think we're talking about an allotment here. What about working party insurance and requirements on allotments? What kind of insurance would that be?
I'm not sure what working party insurance is, so I don't know if Lee could explain what they mean by that. That would be useful if they're able to.
Yeah, hi. Well, there's two things. We are trying to set up a seed swap and hold an event in a village hall. So I'm interested in cover about that and all sort of like sectors of that. Plus we have, although we've got insurance on our allotment, I don't know whether we're properly covered or fully covered as we should be if the committee call working parties where, I mean, obviously people are brandishing tools and all kinds of things. So, you know, could be injured. If we're properly covered there, and what's the best way to review it? And should we be doing risk assessments? We think we are, but we've had a differing of opinion on the committee. So I'd like clarification on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start backwards because I can remember that part easy. That was the last thing you said, Lee. Risk assessments, yes. Everyone should be doing risk assessments. You don't, for insurance purposes, to buy insurance, you don't need to show your risk assessment. What a risk assessment will do is if someone's injured, you know, a member of the public is using the allotment services and falls over and claims to be injured and say it was your fault, you can say, well, actually, we did a risk assessment, so you're defendable. So you know, actually, we know that we didn't cause that injury because we have this risk assessment in place, and as part of that risk assessment, we check this piece of land or that piece of equipment daily, weekly, bi-weekly, whatever it might be. So therefore, you're not liable because it wasn't your fault, it was just an accident. So unless it's, and then the insurer could look at that and then use that in the defence and say, well, actually, it was because, I don't know, Steve was being silly and doing things that he shouldn't have been doing, and that's why he's injured, not because of something that the charity didn't do or failed to fulfil. So that's my professional advice. Always have them and always do them, and that is just good business practice, full stop, for any organisation. Yes, you can go overkill, but we have to do a risk assessment. So we're an insurance broker. Just for the people that are always in the office, we have to do a risk assessment for each individual that sits behind a desk to make sure that they don't get a bad back. So say that, I've been told how to use my chair properly and where to have my screen. Sounds ridiculous, but in our industry, office-based, that is the kind of claims that would come in. I claim a bad back because they didn't give me the correct chair. So we have to do a risk assessment on that. In terms of the event insurance, so just to clear this side up, if you have public liability insurance in place, as a rule, if you're organising an event and it's not a huge event, so it's just a general get-together or a small event in a community centre, as a rule, your public liability should extend to cover it. But it goes back to step 2, I think it is on my presentation, or step 1 actually, your activities and your description. If you never tell your insurance company or broker that you organise events, then they might turn around and say, well, you didn't tell us that you organise events, so how do we know we're meant to be covering events? And that is where it is vitally important to review your documents and engage and have a relationship with your insurance broker, the handler on the other end of the phone, so they understand what you do, and you can put that into a easy to describe paragraph that goes over into an email to a broker to say, we are doing this, this, and this, and we also organise these kind of events for these reasons, and this is the amount of people that would usually turn up. 99% of the time, the insurance broker would say, that's okay to be covered within your charity policy. But if you don't express that and you don't explain what you do, the insurance company and broker won't ever know that they're meant to be covering you for that, and that's where they could potentially come undone on your insurance policy. Lee, did I answer all the questions, or did I miss a bit there as well?
No, that's great. That's absolutely fantastic. Perfect.
And to echo, thank you, Luke, to echo what Luke is saying in terms of risk assessment, at CAVA, we would always recommend that you do risk assessments. As soon as you have volunteers, as soon as you have beneficiaries coming in your premises. If you feel around the mental health element, there might be some challenges with virtual events as well, to protect the people joining your events virtually. Do an internal risk assessment on that front as well. Some people put little messages on the meeting invites to say, just be aware, we will be talking about sensitive subjects, and if you feel like leaving the session at any time, those kind of elements to protect yourself and the people you're supporting. They're going to be the groups you're supporting.
Yeah, and just on that, risk assessments don't need to be this long, complicated, scary world that you need to be completely trained up in. You do a risk assessment by crossing the road. I've got a little baby now, so if I'm crossing the road, I'll do a risk assessment mentally in my head. So then if there was something to happen or I got into a bit of trouble, I would need to justify myself to my fiance and say, no, I did check the road. It wasn't my fault, it was their fault. And if you break it down to basics like that, pretend my fiance is the insurance company, so she can then say, yeah, that person was driving too quickly, or that push bike was actually on the path instead of the road, but I did do a visual check and so on and so forth. So as a business, and yes, you are a charity, but fundamentally as an entity, you are still treated like a business legally, in that sense of you have a responsibility to do those checks on behalf of your employees, your volunteers, the members of the public, your beneficiaries. So there's no point of you doing all this fantastic work if you receive a claim that wipes all the funds out of your organisation because you're not insured correctly, and then you're no longer here to function as an organisation. Having those risk assessments will get you in the mindset of doing the right thing, making changes to reduce the liability exposure that you have as an organisation, therefore creating sustainability for your organisation to continue on for many years to come. So it doesn't need to be this big, scary thing, but in the business world, in the commercial world, document these. Yes, you can do it in your head and you can say, oh, I've checked that that's safe, but write it down, even if it's just in an email to yourself. So then if something happens, you can find that email and say, no, we did do something as an organisation, and actually it wasn't a big concern to us because we did this and this in response to it. So yeah, that's the main thing, just to finish off on risk assessments.
Okay, thank you very much, Luke. If you had questions, feel free to contact CAVA after the event, and we wouldn't fill them in for you, but we would be able to signpost you to where to find templates and those kind of things. We do have quite a few questions actually, so I'll carry on. One from Emma from Carers Trust. We're going to run a sitting service in care homes. Would PLI cover volunteers for health and safety and carers for breakages and stolen items? And they are performing risk assessments.
Yes, so the public liability would cover the public as such, so the beneficiaries and the people that you're servicing as such. They wouldn't cover the volunteer, so if the volunteer were to be injured, that would be the employer's liability side that you need to have covered. If an item's stolen, that's separate, depends on whose item that is. But if your volunteer or your employee damages someone else's property, break something in the care home, then that would be covered under your own public liability. So a classic example, you go in and you knock something over, one of your volunteers knocks something over or spills a drink over, one of their office computers of the care home, then that would be covered under your public liability if it's not your computer and it was someone else's. So yeah, public liability for that, employer's liability to cover the volunteers for their health and safety. So if they become injured or unwell whilst volunteering for you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, Emma?
Yes, thank you. It's just knowing which policy covers what and making sure that obviously we've got both running and they cover the right amount as well. Just one thing I did put in my chat as well is if you use a disclaimer, how valid is that going to be if somebody decides to make a claim?
Yeah, it's the classic, enter your own risk. I think some people are almost deluded that they put a sign up and say, enter your own risk. We take no responsibility. In the eyes of the law, it won't hold up because you as a organisation or a property owner or whatever it might be, you have a legal responsibility to not cause injury to others and you can still be held accountable. So it's a good way to defend yourself as such. So if something were to go wrong, you can say, no, I did tell them not to do that, or I did say, don't cross that line because you will be injured. But it's not a complete get out of jail free card or a waiver form as such. They may well be, in America and things like that, where, if you're doing dangerous activities and you sign this form, you can't sue people. But if they are liable, and because you've done something wrong, then they don't always hold up that well. So I would probably say, rather than putting a disclaimer up, I would probably try to look at it a different way and look at the risks that you could mitigate against, or could you put something in place that reduces that risk of that thing happening? So it depends obviously what the disclaimer is for, but yeah, you can use them. I think it's a good way to get people's attention, but it's not a complete, wash your hands of all liabilities. Unfortunately, there is an element of responsibility still. So.
Thank you. So I'm just thinking on what Emma asked about disclaimers. So we were looking at physical events. What about the disclaimers we see online about groups who share information about, I don't know, the mental health side of things, or have virtual events? How do those disclaimers also really pretty much don't hold water? You still need to have robust insurance behind them.
Yeah, you still definitely need to have a robust system behind them. They are a good way to kind of educate people and try to mitigate against people doing the wrong things. And it will help in a way. But as an entity, if you have found to be liable, then you can't use that and say, well, yes, we did something wrong, or it was our fault, but we did put that sign up to say, or that notice to say, you can't sue us, because people will still try. And again, and with these insurance policies, it's always worth mentioning as well that they're not there just to pay out. They are there to defend. So even if you haven't done anything wrong, you could still receive, a claim against you or an accusation against you. There is costs incurred by a legal team that you should be using, a solicitor, to respond to that initial allegation. And what we've seen in the past is that even if they're not even if you weren't responsible and it wasn't your fault, they've still incurred costs, because the insurance policy will still use their firm of solicitors to push that claim back and say, no, hang on, let's nip that in the bud. We're not at fault here. We know what happened. You weren't even there. You're a chancer, and put it back and they just go away. Where we've seen claims fail, where we've seen claims be successful, is when they haven't been insured correctly, and there wasn't that insurer or that firm of solicitors that you could easily use that would nip that incident in the bud straight away and put it to bed. It kind of escalates and escalates because the charity doesn't know how to deal with it, so they just go, "Oh, we won't, we'll just leave it and hopefully it will go away by itself." They never do. It never, unless you respond, and I wouldn't recommend that you respond. I mean, you know, seek the correct advice and respond, you know, in a professional way with, you know, the right third-party suppliers involved, such as, you know, a legal team. But if you don't respond and just ignore it, it will probably get worse, and it's harder to defend as time goes on, because every day that you don't respond, they're creating a case and building up evidence and suggesting that you've done something wrong. So yeah, I would say be careful of that approach as well.
Thank you. And we have another question from Michael. Do you insure Men in Sheds organisation? And we are very inclusive here, so I do hope the answer is yes.
I knew you were going to say that. We do insure persons in sheds. We do have a number of them. They are still called Men's in Sheds, but yeah, keeping it PC. We cover for their work equipment in terms of the tools of the trade that they use. We have some that have quite heavy machinery, actually, you know, woodworking machines and that kind of stuff. Again, it's harder to insure because you're using tools and quite heavy tools sometimes, depending on the level of work that you get involved in. However, going to an insurance company with your robust risk assessments and your information about how you control and mitigate against injury on these big machines, or even these smaller handheld items, that's all very useful to try and get the cheapest possible premium and the best policy for you by having all that information. So as an example, we have a charity based in Harlow, and they actually have, as part of their organisation, I think they're about a £2 million charity, but they have a full-blown woodworking unit, woodworking shop as such, with lathes and, you know, you name it, they've got this machinery, and it's worth, you know, I think they're worth about £200,000, all of their equipment. And we thought we would never be able to insure these because this is big, heavy machinery, professional machinery that they've got, that they're using, and they're allowing volunteers to use it. We gathered all the right information. We made sure that they have the correct risk assessments. The safety equipment is all up to date on the actual machinery itself, that it's inspected on a regular basis. The correct personal protection equipment is used. The volunteers are well qualified, and the insurers were absolutely fine to do it on the basis that there was good processes involved, but you have to be able to document those processes in that case. So not only that will help you get a better insurance policy and a better price, but it will also help defend against a claim against you in the future as well. So in a long-winded way, yes, we do insure persons in sheds and other buildings.
Okay, thank you. Now there's another subsidiary question from Michael. I don't know if you want to ask it to clarify, Michael. You're asking for the difference between an organiser and a participant of an event.
Yes, if you've got an event that's being organised by one charity, asking other charities if they want to have a table, so the other charities are participants, whereas the other, you know, one charity is an organiser and one's a participant from the point of view of only having a table there. What's the difference between them?
Yeah, so as the organiser, you're responsible for the overall event, the health and safety of that event, the safety of those attendees. Now, you don't know if those attendees are individuals or a trustee that's acting as an individual because they want to come along and support you, or they could be a business. You know, we go to business events, but we turn up but when we're in that building or at that event, really, we're looking at you as the event organizer, that you've done your checks, that you're going to keep us safe. So you've told us, you tell us where the fire alarm is or where the evacuation space is and where the fire exits are. So your public liability as the event organizer would cover the attendees. And then those attending, so say if I'm a charity and I bring a load of my volunteers, that would be covered under the volunteer section. But because we're at your event, and if they were injured at your event and it's your fault as the event organizer, they would claim against you as the event organizer. However, if it's my fault because I'm taking them out as a volunteer and I do something as the leader of that charity to cause injury to one of my volunteers, it's not your fault, Michael, as the event organizer, so they can't sue you. They can sue me because I've put them in a dangerous situation. So that's the main difference. So if you're an event organizer, your public liability covers the attendees of that event because you can cause injury to them. And then for those attending should be looking to be covered by the event organizer because they're putting their safety in your hands as such to a degree, if that helps.
Okay, thanks very much for that. The other point that you were making about the robust processes in place, how do you check those processes are in place? Do you do an audit, or do you expect an audit to have been done? As you point out, heavy machinery, professional machinery, and you've got volunteers working on it. You may say, well, I did tell him to be a bit careful where he put his finger, but he's now not got a finger, you know, that sort of thing. It's very difficult to prove that you told him not to put his finger there.
Yeah, we come across this in the corporate sector, Michael, all the time, especially manufacturing firms. One of my clients in the corporate sector a couple of years ago, they had a big machinery, and you're meant to be putting things through and using safety procedures, so like covers and stuff, to use this machine. There were window fitters, like window manufacturers for the PVC. One of the employees removed the safety guard because it was getting in the way, because it was awkward to get their arm kind of underneath and move it in. So they took a spanner and they removed the safety guard. That person lost a couple of fingers. I think they lost 2. They were still successful in claiming against the company, their employer, because their solicitor said that guard should have never been able to be removed. So because there was a screw available, it seems ridiculous, doesn't it? It seems absolutely ridiculous, but because that employer was responsible for that individual and they were able to take that off, or there wasn't a check in place to see that it was taken off, there wasn't a robust system, the claim couldn't be defended. So our client, their insurance company, just had to pay out because they couldn't defend it. And that is an argument we have with our clients, potentially, that, you know, many commercial customers will say, why are you paying out that our employee that is claiming we did this, this and this? It wasn't our fault, it was their fault. We did check this, we did tell them to do this. But if it goes to court, you can't defend yourself in a way that is robust and that you can prove it. So the insurance company says, well, it's £5,000 for a couple of fingers, or it's £50,000 if we go to court and we might lose. So it's £50,000 plus the court costs plus a couple of fingers. So the insurance company says, we'll negotiate it. It means that the employee is happy. You're not seen as a big kind of corporate beast that doesn't care for its employees. You know, you understand that an incident's happened, and it hopefully builds your brand as an organization, rather than, you know, you don't want to be that company or that charity that says, no, we're not paying out, no, we're not covering X, Y, and Z. So yeah, it's really difficult. You don't need to, we wouldn't do an audit. It's all done on trust. So if you tell us that you have these things in place, we don't need to see it. We tell the insurance company. If you make a claim in the future and the insurance company says, can we see these, and you don't do those checks and you don't do the audits and you don't keep a paper trail and you didn't do those risk assessments, the insurance company could say, well, we're not paying out for your claim and we're not going to cover you because you lied to us, in theory. So it is all done on trust. If you tell us you do something, you have to do it. And if you don't do it, then there is implications to your insurance policy. So best to be honest rather than you know, suggesting that you do something. But this conversation always helps for you just find new processes to follow. So it's always useful to have that in mind. Hopefully that helps, Michael. Does that answer the question?
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, we're at the moment, we're at the process of actually putting in place all the processes, all the paperwork and everything. It's quite a minefield, yes.
Yes, and there is something you could also look at, Michael, which is, and only if it works with your type of organization and doesn't come across as being too dictatorial, it would be to ask your volunteers and the participants to sign a little piece of paper that confirms they have looked at the risk assessment and they have accepted to work within the remit of your risk assessment with them. And that doesn't mean it would make much difference if you ended up in a court situation, but it might just bring to their awareness how careful they have to be as an extra step. So that's something you could look at.
Thank you.
That's okay. We have another question. So that's a question I was going to ask anyway, but that's been asked by Janine. So someone who is a sole trader, so they've got their own insurance as a sole trader, and they're also interacting in a CIC setting. Who's supposed to have insurance? The CIC or the sole trader, or both?
Both, definitely both. So as a sole trader, you'll be doing one set of activities, and that's that tell the insurance broker and company what you do. And then the CIC will also have a description of activities that and it may well be different from the sole trader. If you're a CIC and you're bringing in a sole trader or a third-party organisation to help you run this organisation or deliver services, you as an organisation should be checking that they have the right insurance in place. So they have public liability as is a good example and as a bare minimum. So if you're using a separate company to deliver your services or to help you run your organisation, then check that they have their own insurance policy. And it's kind of a backup. So if they're working for you and their insurance policy fails, but you did check it, but they just maybe missed a payment, it was cancelled, then the claim would go in against them potentially, and then it would pass to you because their policy failed. So you don't want to be picking up on your business insurance policy. It's like your car insurance. You wouldn't want to be picking up claims for other people if it wasn't your fault, because that would make your policy more expensive next year. So ideally, if it is another business or a third party, you want to push that claim to their policy to protect your own insurance package and your claims history and your pricing in the future. So we would recommend both. And if you are the same person, so quite often a sole trader is also operating as a CIC, that's the description piece. So, a sole trader will have one description of activities, and that will probably be one policy. And then the CIC will have a separate description and activity list. So you may need a separate policy for that. If it's close and there's a crossover, you may well be able to negotiate with a broker to have one policy that covers both. However, there is that element of things being missed. So I would strongly advise that you have a fantastic relationship with your broker and they understand what you do in that sense. That's very, very important.
And potentially, if the organisation in question was to stop being a sole trader and only operate within the remit of in that case, a CIC or a charity, then they would only need one set of insurance.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Okay. I have had someone who has asked the question, when you say you're doing a free review with people, because we don't want to be advertising something unwittingly or inappropriately from Cava, you do mean a free review of their current situation, and you would not expect them to purchase anything.
No, absolutely. Yeah. So we believe as a broker that we do the right thing. So we do we call it a silent review. So you send us your current insurance documents, we review it, we email you privately and say, here's some things that you should consider, or here's some potential gaps in cover. Potentially there may not be any suggestions because you have a fantastic policy set up and you have a great broker. Completely free of charge. We won't charge you for that. What we do find is that because it's a great way for you to try our services before you buy. It's that kind of free trial period almost. So we do that, and then maybe next year when your policy is due for renewal, or maybe 5 years time when you have a fallout, or your current broker changes and something happens, you hopefully remember us in the future. Usually people do. We know that it might not be this year, next year, or the year afterwards, but people do come back to us. So they are completely free of charge. There's no kind of ulterior motive where we're going to say, right, now we've done this, you should buy this policy from us. We can tell you how much it would cost if you wanted to say, am I paying the right price or not, or am I in the right ballpark? We can tell you that kind of information. And then if you wish to come back to us in the future, you're always welcome to, but they are completely free of charge. There is no hidden fees or anything similar.
Okay, so we're slightly over 3:30, but there is one more question that I was going to ask, and that's one sent by Claudine. She knows that there is a specialist village hall type of insurance, but the village hall that she's supporting is a charity in its own right. So what would be the best insurance approach to have an insurance against a charity or to go for a specialist village hall insurance?
Yeah, it depends on the scope of the village hall. I'm aware of the village hall specialists out there because we used to have a lot of village halls as our sector in the not-for-profit area. If you are just a village hall doing very traditional village hall activities, then I would suggest a village hall policy is probably the best way to go, or at least have that conversation. However, if you're a charity doing lots of different things like outreach and community work, and which is much wider than a traditional village hall, but you have a village hall that you operate and maybe that funds some of the wider activities that you do, then maybe there's room for two policies there potentially, because a village hall may not cover the kind of outreach element in its full entirety if you're doing counselling services or, you know, lots of other different activities. So it really depends on what you do. But the first port of call, if you're a village hall and that's your primary activity, for example, go to the village hall specialist, have that conversation with them, and they may well be able to wrap up your other covers. But if you don't feel quite confident in that, have a conversation with a charity specialist and compare the two conversations. If there's a clear divide because you are vast in your operation, then maybe two insurance policies. Probably not ideal because it's additional cost, but you may be able to put it on one or the other. I feel like I haven't answered that. I've given you options, but not really potentially answered it. But there's no yes or no answer to that one. So speak to both.
Right. We'll send you our policies. There's a whole lot of housekeeping to be picked over. Because there's so much overlap between responsibility as the local authority, but we're not, in this case, we're managing the trustees, and we've got a management committee going, no, we're in charge. So it's very, and yet we should be responsible for them as volunteers. Yes. So, you know, I can see an awful lot of slippage between everyone thinking, but it's you. And yeah, I just would really feel much more confident if somebody would review our papers.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's use the email address that that was on the presentation. So hello@VHW Charities. That goes through to the group. I see them as well. And then the team and I can look at that. Same goes to everyone else on the call. If you just want to ask a couple of questions that we weren't able to answer today, just send it over in an email. We can answer those, or send over your documents and we can have further conversations. But yeah, happy to help as and where needed. But don't leave this session though as thinking, oh my God, you know, we're in a right mess, because most of the time people do worry, and then when we have a conversation and we help bring out some of the answers in you because we're asking the right questions, you are covered, or you have made considerations and done certain actions, but this is just picking up on maybe the 3 or 4 that need further attention. So it's not always doom and gloom, but most of the time in the insurance industry it is, because that's the world we live in. So unfortunately.
Yes, and I suppose what Luke said at the very start, which is make a list of what you really, really do as an organisation before looking at insurance, and send that to your broker. That's something I've got a CIC myself, and I didn't do that, and I suspect we have a few holes because I tried to select from a page, and actually nothing was exactly fitting with what we do. So a really powerful advice is document properly what you do in quite a lot of detail, and then your broker, who's your friend, is going to be able to look at the right insurance for you. I'm being very kind here, don't overcharge them.
No, the good thing is as well, we are very competitive because, you know, we have so many customers, we have a specialist product. So, you know, hopefully most of you would fit on that specialist product. It's quite vast, but, you know, and I think the main thing to take away from this is just have a relationship. You know, if you have tried to do it yourself on a website, we have a website that you can do it yourself on, but it is aimed at very particular people, and quite often people will try and kind of, you know, force themselves to fit on that because it's cheap, where actually you should have a conversation with someone because you are a little bit different, or you have your uniqueness about you. And it's about, the good thing is if you tell us all the information and we give you an insurance policy and it's wrong, and it's our fault, you can sue us because we're the insurance broker. Where if you do it yourself online, there is no get out of jail there. You know, you've done it, your policy fails, you're still responsible. So please don't sue me, but that's always a good thing to know in the back of your mind.
And I remember, if I remember correctly, Luke, at another event I was at with you, you had discussed the fact that there are not that many brokers around for charities, and therefore it is good to get 2 or 3 quotes. If you start contacting 5, 6, 7, 8 brokers, you will be seen as an organization that is going to 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 brokers. Yeah. So it's still good to have a few brokers that you're asking the question of for competitivity of their pricing. Don't do too many, because am I wrong in saying you would just know in your world, because it's a very small world?
Yeah, absolutely. So the main thing really is that, there's a handful of insurers. So if you go to 5 brokers, they will probably all go to the same 3 or 4 insurers. There's not really many more than that does charity insurance. So I can name them now. You've probably heard of Hiscox, Aviva, but we look after the Aviva product. You've got people like Ansvar, Markel's a fantastic one. As brokers, we would all go to those individual places to try and obtain a quote. So if you give us one, what will end up happening is you'll give me a load of information, and maybe I ask more prudent questions, so I get a bit more information from you. But then you go to another broker, they ask different questions, and they don't get the same information because they've asked it in a different way. I'm going to the same insurer with another broker. The insurer is saying, well, I've seen the details of this charity from you, and they do this, and then this broker said they do this. The insurer will just go, I'm not getting involved because I don't know who's telling the truth. So now you're down to 3 insurance companies that you can approach, and all of a sudden you start closing doors. So the most important thing is picking a broker that you believe understands you and that you can work with, and that will take the time to understand what you do, and then trusting them that they will go to the right insurers. But going to all the insurers that are out there isn't always required, because the brokers know what product is best or what could be best for you potentially. And also the cheapest isn't always the best. It's best to have a selection and a bit of both. So if you go cheap, you might incur problems when you come to make a claim. If you go super expensive, it doesn't mean they're going to be very, very good. But if you find that middle ground, you have confidence that you've not gone cheap. You have responsibility to spend the money wisely, but someone should be able to justify why the price is a little bit more or what's special about that policy. So have a relationship with the insurance broker is the probably takeaway from this one. So they know you and are aware of your existence and what you do. It's probably a good takeaway. Cool, you're on mute.
I'm on mute. Somebody had to say it today. I've run out of questions at my end. So unless there are no further questions, I would remind you that Cava is here to help you on that journey as well. So any type of governance questions, policies, funding, and on the volunteering side as well, you will have some information and links in the PDF we're going to send you. And thank you so much, Luke, for your time and for sharing all of that with us. It's an area that's quite challenging and complex. And I hope that's brought some clarity to you here, all here on the call today.
Perfect. Yeah, thank you for everyone for attending. And always happy to reach out, send us an email if you'd like to have further conversations. But very useful.
Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you. Bye.